You and your son are dangerous to HOA property.
We should remove this old hag and her son from HOA property.
The words hit me like a freight train. If that machine isn't gone by Friday, both of you will be. I stood frozen in my own living room, watching the HOA president's back as she marched toward my front door. Behind me, I could hear my mother gasping for air, her trembling hands clutching the oxygen tube that kept her alive. This woman had just threatened to evict us. Not because we threw loud parties, not because we had an overgrown lawn, not because we violated some reasonable community standard. No, she wanted to evict us because my dying mother needed oxygen to breathe. The machine hummed softly behind me, 40 decibels, barely louder than a refrigerator, and somehow this sound had become grounds for removing a cancer patient from her home. I looked at my mother's face, the humiliation in her eyes, the fear, the way her lips trembled as she tried to apologize for being sick. Apologize for being sick. Something inside me snapped that night, not into rage, not into despair, into absolute, unwavering determination. This HOA president had made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was dealing with a grieving son who would roll over and comply. She thought her clipboard and her yellow violation notices gave her power over life and death. She was about to learn how wrong she was. What happened next would end her reign, expose her cruelty, and become the most satisfying moment of justice I have ever witnessed. Before I tell you how Karen lost everything, her position, her authority, her reputation, I need you to understand something important. I never wanted a fight. I am not a confrontational person. I spent my entire life avoiding conflict, choosing peace, letting small injustices slide, because the energy required to fight them never seemed worth it. But there are moments when staying silent becomes complicity. There are moments when walking away means abandoning someone who cannot defend themselves. My mother could not defend herself. She could barely breathe. And I was the only person standing between her and a woman who seemed determined to make her final months on Earth as miserable as possible. So I fought. I gathered evidence. I learned the law. I documented every violation, every threat, every moment of harassment. And when the time came, I walked into that HOA board meeting with a folder full of proof and a recording that would change everything. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought the rules protected her. She was wrong. My name is Mark Henderson. I am 43 years old, and I work as an accountant for a mid-sized manufacturing company about 20 minutes from the neighborhood where this story takes place. I am not a lawyer. I am not a politician. I am not someone who enjoys public speaking or confrontation. I am a son. That is the only thing that matters in this story. My mother, Linda Henderson, raised me alone after my father passed away when I was 7. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. She never complained. She never made me feel like a burden. She sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. When I graduated college, she cried for an hour. When I got my first real job, she told me it was the proudest moment of her life. When I bought my first house in Maplewood Estates, a quiet subdivision with well-maintained yards and a strong sense of community, she was thrilled. She said it looked like the kind of neighborhood she always dreamed of living in. 5 years later, when her own health started declining and she could no longer live alone, I didn't hesitate for a single second. I moved her in with me. The guest bedroom became her room. The living room became her sitting area. The kitchen became the place where I cooked her favorite meals, and we talked about old memories and laughed about things that happened decades ago. For 2 years, it was wonderful. Then the diagnosis came. 3 months before Karen entered our lives, I sat in a sterile doctor's office and heard words that shattered my world. Late-stage lung cancer. Inoperable. The oncologist spoke gently, professionally, as if he had delivered this news 1,000 times before. He probably had. But for me, each word landed like a physical blow. My mother sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. Too calm. She had suspected for weeks. She had felt her body failing. She knew before the doctors confirmed it. I did not know. I had convinced myself the coughing was just age. The shortness of breath was just deconditioning. The weight loss was just reduced appetite. I was wrong about everything. The treatment options were limited. Chemotherapy could buy time, months, maybe a year, but it would not cure her. Radiation might slow the growth. Pain management would become increasingly important. And she would need supplemental oxygen. The doctor explained that as the cancer progressed, her lungs would become less efficient at extracting oxygen from the air. She would feel breathless, exhausted, suffocated by the simple act of existing. An oxygen concentrator would help. The machine would take air from the room, filter out nitrogen, and deliver pure oxygen through a nasal cannula. It would run almost continuously. It would become as essential as her heartbeat. Without it, she would die faster, more painfully, gasping for breath that would never come. I signed every form they put in front of me. 2 days later, a medical equipment company delivered the concentrator to my house. They set it up in my mother's room, showed me how it worked, and explained the maintenance requirements. The machine was about the size of a small nightstand. It hummed softly when it ran, a gentle, rhythmic sound that reminded me of a white noise machine, maybe 40 decibels at most, quieter than a normal conversation, quieter than a car passing on the street, quieter than the birds that sang in the trees outside my window every morning. I didn't think anyone would even notice it. For the first few weeks, nobody did. Our neighbors were kind. Several of them brought over casseroles and flowers when they heard about my mother's diagnosis. Mrs. Patterson from next door offered to help with grocery shopping. The Nuyens across the street said they would keep an eye on the house whenever I needed to run errands. It felt like a community. It felt like people caring for each other. Then Karen found out about the oxygen concentrator. I need to tell you about Karen Mitchell. She had been the president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association for nearly 8 years. In that time, she had transformed from a concerned community member into something far more dangerous, a petty tyrant with a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority. Karen was 61 years old, with perfectly styled grey hair and a wardrobe that consisted almost entirely of beige pantsuits. She walked through the neighborhood like she owned it, because in her mind, she did. Every blade of grass that grew too tall was a personal offense. Every trash can left at the curb past noon was a moral failing. Every unapproved paint color, garden decoration, or holiday light display was evidence of the decline of civilization itself. The stories about Karen were legendary. She once fined a family $300 because their child's basketball hoop was 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. She sent cease and desist letters to an elderly man who fed birds in his backyard, claiming he was creating a wildlife hazard. She threatened legal action against a young couple because their lawn showed brown patches during a drought during which the city had mandated water restrictions. Everyone in Maplewood Estates had a Karen story. Most people just paid their fines and tried to stay off her radar. I had managed to avoid her for years. My lawn was always mowed. My house was always painted in approved colors. My trash cans were always retrieved within the designated time window. But now I had something Karen considered far worse than an overgrown lawn. I had a visible sign of human frailty. I had a sick mother. And I had a machine that made noise. The day everything changed started like any other. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early September. The weather was warm but pleasant, with a gentle breeze that rustled through the maple trees that gave our neighborhood its name. I had just finished preparing lunch for my mother, tomato soup and grilled cheese, one of the few things she could still eat without difficulty, when I heard footsteps on my front porch. Not a knock. Footsteps. Confident, purposeful footsteps that stopped directly in front of my door. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the entrance. Through the frosted glass, I could see a silhouette, tall, rigid, holding something at chest level. I opened the door. Karen Mitchell stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. She did not smile. She did not offer a greeting. She did not acknowledge the welcome mat beneath her sensible beige shoes. She spoke immediately. "Mr. Henderson, we need to discuss the noise violation." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what noise violation?" "The machine." She gestured vaguely toward the interior of my house. "The one making that constant humming sound. It violates Section 7.4 of our Community Noise Ordinance. All ambient noise must remain below 35 decibels. It took me a moment to understand what she was talking about. The oxygen concentrator. She was talking about my mother's oxygen concentrator. "That's medical equipment," I explained, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "My mother has lung cancer. She needs supplemental oxygen to breathe." I expected sympathy, or at least understanding. Instead, Karen's expression hardened. "I don't care why you have it, Mr. Henderson. Rules apply to everyone equally. That machine is creating a disturbance, and it needs to be turned off." Turned off. She wanted me to turn off my mother's oxygen. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't think you understand. That machine keeps my mother alive. Without it, she can't breathe. She will die." Karen sighed, actually sighed, like I was a difficult child who refused to follow simple instructions. "There are facilities for people in your mother's condition. Nursing homes, hospices, places equipped to handle this sort of thing. A residential neighborhood is not an appropriate location for medical equipment. This is her home. This is a community, Mr. Henderson, and that community has rules." She made a note on her clipboard. "You have 48 hours to resolve this issue. If the noise continues, fines will be assessed. Have a pleasant afternoon." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I stood in my doorway, watching her beige figure disappear down the sidewalk, and felt the first stirrings of something I rarely experienced. Rage. The first fine arrived the next evening. I found it taped to my front door when I returned from picking up my mother's prescriptions. A bright yellow notice with black text, official-looking and utterly absurd. Notice of violation. Property 1847 Maple Creek Drive. Violation Section 7.4 Noise Ordinance. Description: unauthorized medical equipment creating community disturbance. Fine amount $200. Payment due within 14 days. Failure to comply may result in additional penalties, including but not limited to liens on property. I read it 3 times. Unauthorized medical equipment. As if oxygen was contraband. As if keeping my mother alive was a crime. I went inside and immediately began researching. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer, all 73 pages of them, and searched for Section 7.4. It existed. It stated that noise levels should remain below 35 decibels during nighttime hours and below 50 decibels during daytime hours. Daytime hours. My mother's oxygen concentrator operated at approximately 40 decibels, below the daytime limit. I grabbed a decibel meter app on my phone and tested it myself. Standing 3 feet from the machine, it registered 38 to 42 decibels. From outside my mother's bedroom door, it dropped to 31. From outside the house, it was completely inaudible, drowned out by ambient sounds of wind, traffic, and birdsong. The fine was baseless. But Karen didn't care about accuracy. The next day, another violation appeared. Same yellow paper, same Section 7.4 citation, same $200 fine. This time, the description read continued operation of noise-creating device after formal warning. I hadn't done anything different. The machine was running at the same level it always ran. Nothing had changed. Nothing except Karen's determination to make my life miserable. On the third day, I received a letter, not a violation notice, but an official-looking document on HOA letterhead. It informed me that if the unauthorized medical device was not removed from the premises within 7 days, the HOA would begin proceedings to place a lien on my property and pursue legal action for persistent violation of community standards. Legal action over an oxygen concentrator. I called the HOA office. A pleasant-sounding woman answered and immediately transferred me to Karen's voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation. I explained that my mother was terminally ill. I explained that the oxygen was medically necessary. I explained that the noise levels were within daytime limits and completely inaudible from outside the house. Karen never called me back. Instead, she escalated. The fourth violation arrived with a new twist. This time, the notice accused me of operating an illegal medical facility in a residential zone. I stared at the paper in disbelief. A medical facility. Because I had an oxygen concentrator in my guest bedroom. The fine was $500. The letter included a statement that the HOA was consulting with legal counsel about my persistent refusal to comply with community standards. I started documenting everything. I photographed each violation notice with a timestamp. I saved every letter. I recorded the decibel levels of the oxygen concentrator multiple times per day. I researched the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and state regulations regarding reasonable accommodations for disabled residents. My mother watched me from her wheelchair, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Mark," she said one evening, her voice thin and reedy from the effort of speaking, "maybe I should go somewhere else. I don't want to cause problems for you." My heart broke. "Mom, this is your home. You're not going anywhere." "But the fines are illegal. Karen is breaking the law. She just doesn't know it yet." My mother reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper-thin, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this." I squeezed her hand, gently. "You have nothing to apologize for, nothing. Do you understand me?" She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle hum of the oxygen concentrator through the wall, the sound that kept my mother alive, and felt a cold fury building in my chest. Karen Mitchell was not going to win this. The harassment continued for another week. 2 more violation notices, another threatening letter, a formal demand that I appear before an HOA compliance committee to explain my persistent violations. I ignored the committee demand. I was too busy caring for my mother and gathering evidence. Then Karen crossed a line that I never imagined she would cross. It was a Thursday afternoon. My mother had been having a difficult day, more breathless than usual, more fatigued, struggling to eat even the softest foods. I had spent the morning adjusting her oxygen levels and making sure she was comfortable. Around 2 o'clock, I drove to the pharmacy to pick up her pain medication. The trip took approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes. When I returned, I heard voices inside my house. I froze on the porch, keys in hand, listening. One voice was weak, trembling, barely audible. My mother. The other voice was loud, sharp, and familiar. Karen. I opened the door, and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me is burned into my memory forever. Karen Mitchell stood in my living room, directly in front of my mother's wheelchair. She wasn't just talking. She was looming, leaning forward, invading my mother's space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. My mother sat hunched in her chair, her hands wrapped around the oxygen tube as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her eyes were wide with fear. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. She didn't have the breath to speak. She didn't have the strength to defend herself. And Karen was lecturing her. You people are lowering the quality of life around here. That machine is an eyesore. If you're this sick, maybe you shouldn't be living in a community like this. Have you considered that? Have you considered the burden you're placing on everyone else? My mother's eyes filled with tears. She tried to respond. I could see her trying, but all that came out was a small, choked sound. Karen kept going. This neighborhood has standards. We maintain property values. We maintain order. And frankly, your presence here is damaging both. If your son cared about you at all, he would put you somewhere appropriate instead of forcing the rest of us to accommodate your condition. Something inside me shattered. I don't remember crossing the room. I don't remember raising my voice. But suddenly I was there, standing between Karen and my mother, my body acting as a shield. Get out of my house. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was low, steady, and filled with an anger I had never felt before. Karen looked startled for a moment, just a moment, before her expression hardened into familiar contempt. I have HOA authority, Mr. Henderson. I'm conducting an official inspection of the violation. You have no authority here. This is my home. You entered without permission. You are harassing a terminally ill woman. Get out. I was invited in, your mother. My mother cannot consent to anything. She cannot speak. She cannot breathe without assistance. And you know that. You deliberately came when I wasn't here so you could intimidate her without interference. Karen's eyes narrowed. I don't appreciate your tone. I don't care what you appreciate. You have 10 seconds to leave before I call the police. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Then Karen straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair, and turned toward the door. But she couldn't leave without getting the last word. If that machine isn't gone by Friday, she said over her shoulder, both of you will be. The door slammed behind her. I stood there, trembling, listening to her footsteps fade down the walkway. Then I turned to my mother. She was crying. Silent, helpless tears streaming down her face. I knelt beside her wheelchair and took her hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. She shook her head weakly. Not your fault. She's never coming near you again. Do you understand? Never. My mother's grip tightened on my hands. Mark, she said. She said I'm a burden. You are not a burden. You have never been a burden. You are my mother, and I love you, and I will fight anyone who tries to hurt you. She closed her eyes. I'm tired, Mark, so tired. I know, Mom, I know. Let me take you to your room. I wheeled her back to her bedroom, adjusted her oxygen, and sat with her until she fell asleep. Then I went to my computer and started preparing for war. I spent the next 72 hours doing nothing but research and documentation. I learned everything I could about HOA law in our state. I studied the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination based on disability. I read about the Americans with Disabilities Act and its requirements for reasonable accommodations. I found case law from other states where HOAs had been successfully sued for similar behavior. The law was clear. Karen had violated it in almost every possible way. I compiled a folder of evidence. Photographs of every violation notice with timestamps showing when they were posted. Decibel readings proving the oxygen concentrator operated within acceptable limits. Copies of the HOA bylaws highlighting the sections Karen had misapplied. My mother's medical records, including her diagnosis, her oxygen prescription, and her doctor's statement that the concentrator was medically necessary for her survival. Letters from the oncologist explaining that removing or turning off the oxygen would cause immediate respiratory distress and potentially death. Legal summaries of the Fair Housing Act and state disability protections. And one more thing. A video. After Karen's visit, I had installed a small security camera in our living room. I told my mother it was for her safety in case of falls, which was true, but I also wanted to document any future intrusions. What I captured was even more damning than I expected. Karen had returned the next day. My mother was alone again. I was in the backyard, dealing with the trash cans, and Karen had walked right in through the front door, which I had left unlocked. The camera recorded everything. Karen standing over my mother. Karen gesturing at the oxygen tube. Karen saying clearly and audibly, "This machine is going. I don't care if you die. That's not my problem. My problem is maintaining community standards, and you are a violation of those standards." My mother did not respond. She couldn't. She just sat there, trembling, tears running down her face. Karen continued, "If your son had any sense, he would have put you in a home months ago. You're nothing but a burden to him. He's sacrificing his life for a dying woman who should have the decency to die somewhere else." I watched the recording with shaking hands. My mother had never told me about this visit. She had been too ashamed, too broken. I made a copy of the video and added it to my folder. Then I checked the calendar. The next HOA board meeting was in 4 days. I couldn't do this alone. I spent the next 2 days talking to neighbors. It turned out I wasn't the only one Karen had terrorized. Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor, told me about the time Karen fined her for having a non-approved garden ornament, a small ceramic frog that her late husband had bought her for their anniversary. The fine was $300. Mrs. Patterson paid it because she didn't have the energy to fight. The Nguyens across the street had received multiple violations for their children's bicycles being visible in the garage. The HOA rules said nothing about bicycles, but Karen had interpreted a clause about maintaining orderly appearance to include anything she personally found unsightly. A young couple at the end of the block had been fined for having window curtains that were too colorful. Another family had been threatened with legal action for installing a doorbell camera, which Karen claimed was surveillance equipment that violated privacy rules. Everyone had a story. Everyone was afraid of Karen. But when I told them what she had done to my mother, when I showed them the video, something changed. Fear turned to anger. Mrs. Patterson said she would testify at the board meeting. The Nguyens offered to bring written statements from other residents Karen had harassed. The young couple with the colorful curtains volunteered to help me prepare my presentation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. We were going to take Karen down. Together. The evening before the board meeting, I sat with my mother in her room. The oxygen concentrator hummed softly, that gentle, life-giving sound that had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. My mother was having a good day. Her breathing was easier, her color better, her eyes more alert than they had been in weeks. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "A little." "You shouldn't be. You're doing the right thing." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had raised me, the woman who worked 3 jobs to pay for my education, the woman who never complained, never made excuses, never gave up. Cancer had stolen her strength, but it had not stolen her spirit. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm going to play a video tomorrow at the meeting, a video of Karen talking to you." My mother's face went pale. "You recorded that?" "The security camera recorded it. I didn't know it happened until I reviewed the footage." She closed her eyes. "Mark," she said terrible things, things I didn't want you to hear. "I know, I've already seen it." Silence. "I'm not ashamed, Mom, and you shouldn't be either. She's the one who should be ashamed. What she said to you was cruel and illegal and inexcusable, and tomorrow everyone is going to know it." My mother opened her eyes. "What if it doesn't work? What if the board sides with her?" "They won't." "How do you know?" "Because I have the evidence, because I have the law, because I have neighbors who are willing to stand up, and because Karen has made too many enemies to have any allies left." My mother reached out and took my hand. "When did you become so brave?" "I learned from you." We sat together in silence, listening to the oxygen concentrator hum. Tomorrow, everything would change. The Maplewood Estates HOA board met on the first Tuesday of every month at the community clubhouse. A modest building with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. I arrived 15 minutes early with my folder of evidence, my laptop, and my portable projector. The room was already filling up. Word had spread. People knew something was going to happen. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, her ceramic frog clutched in her hands like a talisman. The Nuyens were near the back, surrounded by other families Karen had harassed. The young couple with the colorful curtains had brought their written statements and looked ready for battle. And at the front of the room, seated at a long table with the other board members, sat Karen Mitchell. She looked confident, smug, completely unaware of what was about to happen. She saw me setting up my projector and frowned. "Mr. Henderson, this is a closed board meeting. Residents are welcome to observe, but presentations require advance approval." I looked at her calmly. I submitted a formal request to address the board regarding ongoing violations and harassment. It was approved by Vice President Thornton 3 days ago. Karen's frown deepened. She glanced at the vice president, a middle-aged man with glasses and a tired expression, who nodded confirmation. "The request was properly submitted," Thornton said. "He has the floor after old business." Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't object. I sat down and waited. Old business took forever. Discussions about landscaping contracts, debates about pool maintenance schedules, arguments about holiday decoration guidelines. I barely heard any of it. My heart was pounding. My palms were sweating. But I was ready. Finally, Vice President Thornton cleared his throat. "Moving on to new business. We have a formal presentation from Mark Henderson regarding complaints against the enforcement practices of our HOA president. Mr. Henderson, you have 20 minutes. I stood up. The room went quiet. Karen smiled, a thin, condescending smile that said she expected me to humiliate myself. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll try to be brief, but I have a lot of evidence to present." I clicked to my first slide. It showed a photograph of my mother, taken before her diagnosis when she was healthy and smiling and full of life. This is my mother, Linda Henderson. She is 71 years old. 3 months ago, she was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. She is terminal. The doctors have given her less than a year. I clicked to the next slide. A photograph of the oxygen concentrator. This is the medical equipment that keeps her alive. It's called an oxygen concentrator. It takes air from the room, filters it, and delivers pure oxygen to her through a nasal cannula. Without it, she cannot breathe. Without it, she will die. I clicked to the next slide. A copy of the first violation notice. 2 weeks after my mother's diagnosis, I received this. a $200 fine for unauthorized medical equipment creating community disturbance. The equipment in question was her oxygen concentrator. A murmur went through the room. Karen's smile flickered. I continued. I showed them every violation notice, 6 in total, adding up to over $1,700 in fines. I showed them the threatening letters about liens and legal action. I showed them the decibel readings, proving the oxygen concentrator operated well within acceptable limits. I showed them the sections of the HOA bylaws that Karen had misapplied. I showed them the Fair Housing Act guidelines that prohibited discrimination based on disability. I showed them the medical documentation proving the oxygen was medically necessary. With each slide, the murmurs grew louder. With each revelation, Karen's smile faded further. And then I got to the video. Board members and residents, I need to show you something. This video was recorded by a security camera in my home. It shows HOA President Karen Mitchell visiting my terminally ill mother while I was not present. I want to warn you that the content is disturbing. I clicked play. The video appeared on the screen. Karen standing over my mother. Karen lecturing her. Karen saying, I don't care if you die, that's not my problem. Karen saying, you're nothing but a burden to him. Karen saying, you should have the decency to die somewhere else. My mother crying, unable to respond. The room went completely silent. I let the video play for a full minute before pausing it. Then I turned to face the board. This is what your HOA president did to my dying mother. She entered my home without permission. She harassed a woman who cannot speak, cannot walk, and cannot defend herself. She told a cancer patient that she should die somewhere else. I pointed at Karen. This is not enforcement. This is not protecting community standards. This is cruelty. This is harassment. This is discrimination against a disabled person, which is a violation of federal law. Karen's face had gone white. She stood up, her hands trembling. That video is taken out of context. There is no context, I said, my voice rising. That makes it acceptable to tell a dying woman that she should have the decency to die somewhere else. There is no context that makes it acceptable to enter someone's home without permission and intimidate a cancer patient. There is no context that makes it acceptable to fine a family for keeping their mother alive. Karen tried to speak again, but voices were rising around the room. Mrs. Patterson stood up. She fined me $300 for a ceramic frog my husband gave me before he died. The Nuyens stood up. She fined us for our children's bicycles. More voices joined in. Stories poured out, petty fines, unreasonable demands, harassment, intimidation, years of accumulated grievances finally finding expression. Karen was surrounded by a wall of anger. Vice President Thornton banged his gavel. Order, order, please. The room gradually quieted. Thornton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Mr. Henderson, thank you for your presentation. It's clear that there have been serious violations of policy and, potentially, of law. He turned to Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, the evidence presented here is extremely troubling. The video, in particular, shows behavior that is completely unacceptable for any representative of this HOA. Karen's voice was shrill. I was trying to enforce our community standards. That machine is a violation. Medical equipment is explicitly protected under the Fair Housing Act, I interrupted. The HOA has no authority to regulate it. Any fines or enforcement actions related to medically necessary equipment are illegal. Thornton nodded. Mr. Henderson is correct. I've reviewed the legal documentation he submitted, and our HOA counsel has confirmed that these enforcement actions were improper. He turned to the other board members. I move that we take the following actions. First, all fines issued to Mr. Henderson related to his mother's medical equipment are immediately cancelled. Second, a formal written apology is issued to Mr. Henderson and his mother on behalf of the HOA. Third, Mrs. Mitchell's enforcement authority is immediately suspended pending a full investigation. Fourth, we begin formal proceedings to remove Mrs. Mitchell from her position as president. Another board member seconded the motion. The vote was called. 4 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention, Karen herself, who was too shocked to respond. The motion passed. Karen Mitchell sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief. Everything she had built, her power, her authority, her reign of petty tyranny, crumbled in an instant. I gathered my materials and walked out of the meeting. Behind me I heard Karen's voice, small and broken. You can't do this. I've given 8 years to this community. 8 years. Nobody responded. In the weeks that followed, the consequences for Karen continued to mount. The board's investigation uncovered a pattern of abuse stretching back years: improper fines, harassment of vulnerable residents, misuse of HOA funds, falsified violation reports. Karen was not just removed as president. She was banned from serving on the HOA board in any capacity. She was banned from attending board meetings. She was required to pay restitution to multiple residents she had improperly fined, including myself. And she faced something far more serious. Based on the evidence I provided, several residents filed complaints with the state's Fair Housing Agency. Karen was investigated for civil rights violations. The investigation found that her actions constituted a pattern of discrimination against disabled residents, not just my mother, but others as well. The penalty was severe. Karen was required to complete 40 hours of sensitivity training. She was ordered to pay a fine of $15,000 to the state. She was prohibited from serving in any leadership capacity in any homeowners association, condominium board, or similar organization for a period of 10 years. Her reputation was destroyed. The woman who had terrorized our neighborhood for nearly a decade was finally held accountable. But the legal outcomes, satisfying as they were, mattered less to me than what happened in my own home. The day after the board meeting, Vice President Thornton came to my door personally. He held an envelope in his hand. Mr. Henderson, I want to apologize. On behalf of the entire Maplewood Estates community, I am deeply sorry for what you and your mother have been through. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a formal letter of apology, signed by all 4 remaining board members, along with a check refunding every dollar Karen had improperly fined us. We should have noticed sooner, Thornton said. We should have paid attention to the complaints. We failed your family, and I'm sorry. I thanked him, but the apology that meant the most came from my neighbors. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. People who had been afraid to speak out began reaching out to me. They brought food. They offered help. They thanked me for standing up. Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and stayed to visit with my mother for an hour. The Nuyens organized a rotating schedule of neighbors to help with grocery shopping and errands. The young couple with the colorful curtains planted a beautiful flower arrangement in our front yard, in colors that Karen would have hated. Our neighborhood, freed from Karen's tyranny, began to heal. My mother lived for 8 more months after the board meeting. They were good months. Without the stress of Karen's harassment, without the fear of fines and eviction, without the constant humiliation, my mother was able to focus on what mattered. She spent time with old friends who came to visit. She watched her favorite movies. She told me stories about my father that I had never heard before. She laughed, she cried, she lived. The oxygen concentrator hummed in the background. That gentle, life-giving sound that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. Some nights I would sit with her in her room, holding her hand, listening to that hum. "Mark," she said one evening, about a month before the end, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For fighting for me, for not giving up, for making me feel like I mattered." "You've always mattered, Mom. You're the most important person in my life." She smiled, that same warm smile I remembered from childhood. I know I wasn't always the best mother. I worked too much. I wasn't around enough. Stop, you were perfect. You are perfect. Everything I am, everything I have. It's because of you. She squeezed my hand. "I love you, Mark. I love you too, Mom." We sat in silence, listening to the oxygen concentrator hum. My mother passed away on a Sunday morning in late spring. She went peacefully in her sleep, with me holding her hand. The oxygen concentrator was still running when she died, still delivering that stream of pure air that had kept her breathing for so long. When the medical team came to take her away, one of them reached out to turn off the machine. I stopped them. "Leave it on, just for a minute." They nodded and stepped back. I sat alone in the room, listening to that gentle hum, the sound that Karen Mitchell had tried to silence, the sound that had become a symbol of everything I had fought for. Then I reached out and turned it off myself. The silence was overwhelming, but it was a peaceful silence, a silence that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It's been 6 months since my mother died. I still live in Maplewood Estates. The neighborhood is different now, friendlier, more connected, more willing to look out for each other. The new HOA president is a retired school teacher named Dorothy who believes that the purpose of a homeowners association is to help residents, not harass them. Under her leadership, the bylaws have been revised to explicitly protect medical equipment and accommodate disabled residents. Karen Mitchell moved away 3 months ago. I don't know where she went, and I don't care. What I do know is that her reign of petty tyranny is over. What I do know is that my mother's final months were spent in peace and dignity. What I do know is that I stood up when it mattered, and that made all the difference. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of that oxygen concentrator hum. It's not a sad sound anymore. It's a reminder. A reminder that love is worth fighting for. A reminder that bullies can be defeated. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope exists. My mother taught me that, and I will never forget. If you are going through something similar, if you have an HOA president or board member who is harassing you, discriminating against you, or making your life miserable, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You have rights. The Fair Housing Act protects disabled residents and their families from discrimination. State and federal laws require reasonable accommodations for medical equipment. HOAs do not have unlimited power, no matter what they claim. Document everything, research the law, find allies, and don't be afraid to stand up. Karen Mitchell thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. And whoever is making your life difficult, they're wrong too. Fight back. The oxygen tank in my mother's room was never just a medical device. It was a symbol of life, a symbol of love, a symbol of the courage it takes to protect the people we care about. And that hum, that gentle, persistent hum, will echo in my heart forever. Thank you for reading my story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll share it with others who might be going through similar struggles. If you have your own HOA horror story, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment below. Let's build a community of people who are willing to stand up against petty tyranny. And if you're currently dealing with harassment or discrimination, please reach out to a fair housing organization in your area. There are people who can help. You don't have to face this alone. Nobody does. Stay strong, keep fighting, and never forget that the bullies only win when we stop pushing back. This was the oxygen tank incident. This was the story of how one HOA president tried to kill my dying mother. And this was the story of how she failed. If you found value in this story, please like, subscribe, and share. Every interaction helps spread the word and supports others who are fighting similar battles. Together, we can hold bullies accountable and create communities where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Thank you for being part of this journey.